The bath pump room was not unkind on that particular Tuesday morning, only bright and a little crowded, the way it always was at the height of the season, and the long, arched windows let in the soft, cool light of an autumn that had not yet decided whether to turn cold. The polished marble floor caught the light and held it gently. The pump itself murmured into its cup, a small, steady sound that traveled under all the talking, and the talking moved across the room in soft little tides, and Charlotte Pennington stood quite still by one of the tall windows, with her hand resting on the back of a small upright bath chair. Her mended cream silk gloves laid carefully on the marble side table beside her. She had taken the gloves off because the room was warm. She had laid them flat the way her mother had taught her, palms up, fingers together. The dark thread repair stitching across the second and third fingers of the right glove was very neat. She had done it herself by candlelight 4 nights ago, sitting at the small drawing-room table at her aunt's lodging in Milsom Street, and she had told herself softly, while she worked, that no one would notice. She had been wrong, and she knew it now, but she did not turn her face from the window. In the center of the pump room, 3 young ladies stood in a small, careful group, and one of them was her own elder cousin, Lavinia Hartley, who had been spending the season in Bath since August and had a great many opinions about what was fashionable and what was not. The other 2 were friends of Lavinia's whom Charlotte did not know well. They had drifted past the marble side table only a moment before, and Lavinia had picked up the right-hand glove and held it up to the light between 2 pale yellow fingertips, and the soft laugh that followed was not loud, but it carried, the way certain laughs always carry across rooms with marble floors. "Oh, my dear," Lavinia said in a voice that was not quite low enough. "Do look at this. Do look. The poor thing has actually mended them." "Mended them," one of the friends repeated in a tone of gentle wonder, as though it were a marvelous thing. "4 times, I should think," Lavinia said, turning the glove. "You can almost count the rows of stitching." "Well," said the other friend, "perhaps in the country." "Perhaps in the country," Lavinia agreed, and the 3 of them laughed quietly together, and the laugh traveled along the colonnade and across the floor, and reached the tall, arched window where Charlotte stood, with her hand on the back of the small, upright chair. She did not turn red. That was what she would remember later. Not the laughter, not the held-up glove, not the words. Only the small, surprised steadiness of her own face, as though her body had decided, without consulting her, that it would not be giving way today. She took her hand off the chair back. She took one breath, and then another. She walked the length of the pump room. She walked past the pump, and past the central group, and past her cousin, and she did not look at Lavinia, and she did not look at the friends. She crossed all the way to the far side, where her aunt, Mrs. Beatrice Pennington, was sitting on a small chair near the warm water counter, with a porcelain cup in her hand, and a soft, worried look in her kind, hazel eyes. And Charlotte said, very quietly, "Aunt, would you let me have my gloves back, please?" Mrs. Pennington blinked. "Your gloves, my dear." "They are on the side table by the window," Charlotte said in the same even voice. "I left them there a moment ago." "Ah," her aunt said, "I see." She did not see quite, but she would. She set down the porcelain cup very gently and stood up, and she walked the long way back across the pump room with Charlotte at her side, not hurrying, not slow, only walking, and when they reached the marble side table, Charlotte picked up the gloves herself. She did not look at the central group. She folded the gloves once, palms together, and tucked them into her small, fitted black wooden reticule, and the brass clasp made a very small, soft click. "My dear," Mrs. Pennington said under her breath. "Not here, Aunt," Charlotte said softly. "Please." "No," her aunt agreed. "Not here." They turned back toward the colonnade together, and the pump room kept on moving in its soft tides, and Lavinia Hartley and the two friends were still in the middle of the room, and the friends were still smiling, but Lavinia, very faintly, was not. She had seen Charlotte cross the floor. She had seen the gloves go into the reticule. She had seen the brass clasp click. She had not, until that moment, considered that the heroine of her small, unkind moment might walk straight past her on the way out. It was at that moment that the Duke of Wycombe came in. He came in from the street side, alone, in a high-collared, fitted dark charcoal Regency tailcoat buttoned at the chest, over a cream silk waistcoat with small horn buttons, a white silk cravat tied neatly, ankle-length fawn breeches buttoned at the knee over white silk stockings, and polished black knee-high riding boots that had clearly been worn that morning along the river path. He took off his hat as he came under the colonnade. He had the look of a man who had stopped at the pump room only because his aunt expected him to, and who would have rather been outdoors in the cool autumn air, watching the leaves come down on the avenue at home in Somerset. He had not been listening for laughter. He had been thinking, in fact, about a torn riding glove of his own that he had carried with him from Lindenmere Park. A small brown leather glove, badly split across the back of 2 fingers, that he had been meaning to give to a saddler for a week and had not got around to. The glove was in the inside pocket of his tailcoat. He felt the small, careful weight of it as he walked under the arch, and that was the moment that Lavinia Hartley laughed again. A small, fresh laugh at a private remark from her friend. And Henry Lockwood, who had been a widower for 3 years and had heard a great many laughs in a great many drawing rooms, lifted his head. He saw the central group. He saw the cream silk gloves still half visible in the open mouth of a small, fitted black wooden reticule. He saw a slender, modest woman, 5'4", with long, wavy, honey-blonde hair pinned up in a soft, low chignon, and a single sprig of small white violets, large, warm, gray-blue eyes, in a high-collared, soft cream silk Regency morning gown with tiny embroidered violets at the hem, walking quietly toward the doorway with her aunt at her side. He had a clear, small thought, the way men with a quiet old grief will, sometimes, when something straight and well-mended walks past them. He thought, "I will not let her leave this room without speaking to her." He crossed the pump room. He did it in a straight line. He did not pause at the central group. He did not nod at his own acquaintances. He came up to Charlotte Pennington's side, 3 paces from the doorway, and stopped, hat in hand, and bowed once, very correctly. "Miss Pennington," he said. "Forgive me. I am Wycombe. We were introduced last winter at Lady Halford's, though I do not think you remember. I wonder if you would do me the very great kindness of walking the colonnade with me for a quarter of an hour. The light is particularly fine today." Charlotte was quiet a moment. "The light, Your Grace?" "The light," he said gently, "and the company. I have been by myself all morning." In the center of the room, Lavinia Hartley had stopped laughing. The friend on her left was looking openly now, and the friend on her right had taken a small, involuntary step back. None of them had thought, when they took up the mended glove, that the Duke of Wycombe would walk the length of the pump room. Charlotte looked at her aunt. Mrs. Pennington gave a very small nod, the kind aunts give when they have understood a thing in less than a second. "I should be glad to walk with you, Your Grace," Charlotte said. He offered his arm. She put her hand on it. They turned together and walked out under the colonnade into the soft, cool autumn light, and Mrs. Pennington stood by the marble side table with her small porcelain cup and watched them go, and her kind hazel eyes filled, for one moment, very gently, with a thing that was not quite tears. If this story is keeping you company tonight, take a moment to press the like button below. It helps these candlelit stories find their readers. Under the colonnade, the autumn light was pale and even, and the wind, when it came, was very soft. The Duke walked at her pace. He did not speak quickly. He did not, in fact, speak for some little time, and Charlotte, walking beside him in her mended cream silk gloves, was content to let the quiet keep them company. She had not expected, when she crossed the pump room, to be walking out under any gentleman's arm. She had only expected to leave, if she was honest, and to go home and put the gloves carefully away in her drawer, and not say anything to her aunt about it until later. At the end of the colonnade, he paused and looked out across the small green of the Abbey yard. "Miss Pennington," he said, "I should tell you, in fairness, that I overheard the small unkindness inside. Your Grace, I do not say so to embarrass you," he said, very gently. "I say so because I would rather you knew at the start that I came across the room because I had heard it, and not because I wished to be civil. There is a difference, I think." She was quiet again. "There is a difference," she agreed after a moment. "My late wife," he said in the same quiet voice, "used to mend her own gloves. Not from need, you understand, only because she liked to. She told me once that a glove that has been mended is a glove that has been thought about. I have remembered that for a great many years." The wind moved a little along the colonnade and lifted, very slightly, the single sprig of small white violets in her hair. "Your Grace is kind to say so," Charlotte said. "I am not being kind," he said. "I am telling you a thing that is true." They walked a little further. He asked her presently where she was staying, and she told him about her aunt's small lodging in Milsom Street. And he asked her how long she would be in Bath, and she told him very honestly that she did not know, that her father had given her the season, and that she meant to use it carefully. He nodded at that. He did not push. They came at last to the end of the colonnade, and he stopped and bowed again. "Miss Pennington," he said, "I am taking my aunt out to my country estate at Lindenmere in Somerset on Saturday next for the early November shooting party. It is a quiet party, 6 guests, my aunt presiding. I should be very glad if you would allow me to invite you and Mrs. Pennington as my guests. There is a library at Lindenmere that I think you might like. The desk catches the afternoon light particularly well." She looked at him a moment. "Your Grace," she said softly, "I am the 3rd daughter of a country gentleman with a small dowry. I do not know whether it is wise." "Miss Pennington," he said, and his kind gray-blue eyes were very steady. "I have not, in 3 years, asked anyone what they thought of the desk in my library. I am asking you. I should very much like an answer." She gave a small, surprised, slow smile. It was the first time she had smiled since the laughter in the pump room. "Then I shall ask my aunt," she said. That evening, in the small drawing room at the lodging in Milsom Street, with a single candle on the writing table and the soft hush of the late hour through the tall, arched window, Charlotte sat with the cream silk gloves laid open across her lap and threaded a fine, small needle with dark thread. And she went over the careful repair stitching once again, the way one does when one cannot quite decide if a thing is finished. Her aunt sat opposite her in the high-collared mauve Regency morning gown, soft, full, upright build, neatly groomed silver gray hair under the small white lace cap, a porcelain cup of tea cooling in her hand. "My dear Mrs." Pennington said after a long, quiet, "We should accept the invitation. I am only mending the gloves, Aunt." "You are doing more than that, my dear, but I shall not say so." A pause. "He is a good man. His mother was a good woman. The estate is a good estate. I have known the family 30 years. He has lost a wife, Aunt." "Yes." "That is a great deal to ask of any woman." "It is," her aunt agreed, very gently. "And he has not asked it. He has asked you to look at his desk." "Aunt," Charlotte said softly, "what would my mother have said?" "Your mother, my dear." "Yes." Mrs. Pennington set down the porcelain cup. She looked at her niece for a long, quiet moment. "Your mother, my dear, would have said 3 things. She would have said that a man who walks the length of a pump room is a man who has decided. She would have said that a quiet widower is not a frightening thing, only a careful one. And she would have said, my dear, that a girl who has mended her gloves 4 times has earned the right to sit in any library in England that will have her. And she would have, my dear. I knew her 30 years. Yes, Aunt. And I shall tell you a 4th thing on her behalf, since she is not here to tell you herself. She would have said, do not go because he is a duke. Go because he asked you plainly, in a pump room full of unkind people, with his hat in his hand. Yes, Aunt. That is all, my dear. Thank you, Aunt. You are very welcome. The candle moved. Charlotte's needle moved. Outside in Milsom Street a hackney passed and was gone, and the small drawing room was very quiet again. Aunt, she said softly after another while, do you think the gloves are very dreadful? Mrs. Pennington looked at her over the porcelain cup. I think the gloves are very dear, my dear, she said, and I think the women who laughed at them this morning have not had to mend a thing in their lives, and I think a man who has buried a wife knows the difference between a woman who has been thought about and a woman who has only been bought. Charlotte put her needle down. She sat with her hands very still on the cream silk gloves on her lap. She did not speak again for a little while, and her aunt did not press her, and the candle burned a little lower, and at last Charlotte said very softly, We shall go to Lindenmere, Aunt. Yes, my dear, Mrs. Pennington said. I think we shall. Lindenmere Park, in early November of the year 1815, was a pale stone Regency manor at the end of a long beech avenue, with a formal rose garden whose roses had mostly gone to soft autumn hips, and a long oak-paneled library on the south side of the house that caught the afternoon light through 3 tall, arched windows, and made the polished walnut writing desk in the center of the room glow very quietly, the way old wood does when it has been cared for. There were 6 guests besides Charlotte and her aunt. There was the Duke's aunt, Lady Marlbury, presiding with great kindness from the head of the long dining table. There were 2 old college friends of the Duke's with their wives, and a vicar and his sister. The party was, as the Duke had promised, very quiet. The first 3 days passed in walks along the beech avenue, in long, careful breakfasts that finished without anyone hurrying, in small games of whist by the drawing-room fire after dinner, and in long, peaceful afternoons when the guests withdrew into their separate small pursuits. The Duke's college friends out shooting, their wives writing letters, the vicar's sister at the pianoforte. Charlotte spent most of those afternoons in the library. Her aunt had told her in the carriage on the way down from Bath that a girl with a small dowry and a careful upbringing had no business making any sort of decision before the 4th day of any house party, and Charlotte, who was not in the habit of disagreeing with her aunt, had simply taken her sewing into the library and waited. On the second evening, the Duke had come into the library after dinner, with a small porcelain cup of coffee in his hand, and had stood for some time by the cold hearth before he spoke. "Miss Pennington," he said, "I do not wish you to feel that you are being looked at. I have asked my aunt to keep the company occupied with whist. The library is yours while you are at Lindenmere." "Your Grace is very kind." "I am not being kind," he said again. "I am only being careful." She had looked up from her sewing at that. He had not been looking at her. He had been looking at the cold hearth, in the way of a man speaking to a fire he had not yet lit. The library had been very quiet around them. "Your Grace," she said after a moment, "may I ask you something?" "You may, Miss Pennington." "Why did you cross the pump room?" He was quiet a long moment. He turned the porcelain cup once in his hand, very slowly. "Because I have not, in 3 years, seen anyone walk past unkindness so straight," he said at last. "I am told it is fashionable in Bath to color a little when one is laughed at. You did not color. I thought only that I should like to know who you were before you went out of the door." "Your Grace." "I should not have said that, perhaps," he said gently. "Forgive me." "You should not apologize, Your Grace. I should rather you said true things than fashionable ones." "Then I shall," he said. "I shall try." He set down the porcelain cup on the mantel. He bowed. He did not quite leave at once. "Miss Pennington," he said from the doorway, "the library has the best afternoon light in the house. I should be glad if you used it. I should be very glad. That is all I came in to say." "Then I shall, Your Grace," she said. "Thank you." "Good night, Miss Pennington." "Good night, Your Grace." "Your Grace." "Yes, Miss Pennington." "Did your aunt put us in the small green bedroom on purpose?" "She did, Miss Pennington. It was my mother's favorite. The window faces the rose garden." "I had thought as much." "You shall tell me in the morning whether the wallpaper suits you. My mother chose it in 1789. We have not had the heart to take it down." "I shall not let you take it down, Your Grace. I have already decided about it." "Have you, Miss Pennington?" "I have. I shall be very firm about it. You have been warned." "I am much obliged, Miss Pennington." He went. The library was quiet again, and Charlotte sat very still with her sewing in her lap for a little while, and the small green volume of Cowper that she had not yet been lent looked down at her from the south window shelf, and she did not quite take up the needle again that evening. On the third afternoon, he found her in the rose garden. She had gone out alone after the morning rain to look at the roses that had gone to soft autumn hips, and she was standing with one mended cream silk gloved hand on the cold iron of the formal garden's south gate. And the Duke came down the gravel path from the house in his polished black knee-high riding boots, and he stopped at a careful 3 paces from her and bowed. "Miss Pennington." "Your Grace." "Forgive me. My aunt sent me to ask whether you would like a shawl. The wind is fresher than it looks." "I shall be quite well, Your Grace." "Then I shall sit down, if I may, on this bench, and look at the roses with you for a little while. You shall send me away when you wish to be alone." "I should not send Your Grace away from his own roses." "They are not my roses, Miss Pennington. My mother planted them. I have only kept them. There is a difference." "Yes," she said, "there is a difference." He sat. She did not quite sit. She stayed at the gate. They looked at the roses for a quiet little while. "Your Grace," she said softly after a moment, "what was your wife's name?" He did not look at her. He looked very steadily at the rose hips on the south wall. "Marian," he said, Lady Marian Lockwood. She died of a fever in the spring of 1812. We had been married 4 years. She was 26 when she died. I am sorry, Your Grace. I have been sorry for 3 years, Miss Pennington. I have begun, in the last fortnight, to feel that perhaps I am ready to be less so. That is a difficult thing to say, in a rose garden, to a young lady I am only beginning to know. I shall ask your forgiveness for saying it. Your Grace need not ask forgiveness for saying a true thing. You have a way, he said very quietly, of giving me back the thing I have just said, slightly cleaner than I left it. It is only my upbringing, Your Grace. My father is a country clergyman's brother. We were taught not to throw away true things. It is a very fine upbringing. It is, Your Grace. It is the only one I have. He gave a small breath that was almost a laugh and stood up. Shall I leave you with the roses, Miss Pennington? You shall not, Your Grace. You shall walk back with me. The wind, as you said, is fresher than it looks. He bowed again and offered her his arm. She took it. They walked back along the gravel path toward the pale stone manor, very slowly, very carefully, and neither of them said anything else, and his aunt watched them through the south window of the morning room and did not make any sort of remark about it at all. On the 4th afternoon, it began to rain. A slow, steady November rain that made the south windows blur very gently and turned the beech avenue beyond into a soft gray watercolor and put everyone indoors. The Duke's college friends had taken up cards in the drawing room. The wives were writing more letters. The vicar's sister had given the pianoforte a rest. The Duke had been out riding when the rain began and had come in by the side door. And Charlotte heard him in the corridor for a moment, speaking quietly to his valet, and then he came into the library alone with his coat still faintly damp at the shoulders, and he stopped in the doorway when he saw her at the writing desk by the south window with her sewing. Miss Pennington, he said, and bowed. Forgive me. I had not thought anyone was using the library. I shall move, Your Grace. You shall do nothing of the kind, he said gently, and came in and shut the door behind him, and stood for a moment by the cold hearth as though he were not quite certain what to do with himself in his own library. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his tailcoat and took out a small brown leather riding glove, badly split across the back of 2 fingers, and he turned it over once in his hands, and he came quietly across the room and stood beside the writing desk. Miss Pennington, he said, may I ask you something? She set down her sewing. Of course, Your Grace. I have been carrying this glove in my pocket for 10 days, he said. I have been meaning to give it to a saddler. I have not got around to it. I have a fine, warm pair already in the cloakroom, so it is not for the want of another pair. It is only that I am fond of these particular gloves. He paused. My late wife gave them to me. Charlotte looked at the glove. She looked at his face. She did not speak. I wonder, he said very gently, if you would mend it for me. She was quiet a long moment. Your Grace, she said softly, I should be glad to. He laid the glove down on the polished walnut desk between them. He went, without a word, to the small mahogany workstand by the south window, and he brought back a fine small needle and a spool of dark waxed thread that had once belonged to his mother, and he set them down beside the glove. Then he sat down in the chair across the desk from her, not behind her, not over her shoulder, but across, and he laced his fingers together very loosely on the polished walnut, and he watched her. She picked up the needle. The candle on the desk had been lit against the rain-gray afternoon, and the small flame put a single warm circle of light across the glove and across her hands. She threaded the needle. She turned the glove gently and ran her finger along the split. She began. She mended the glove by the candlelight in 11 careful minutes. The Duke did not speak. He did not move, except once, when he reached for the small pair of scissors on the desk and laid them within her reach without comment. The library was very quiet. The rain on the south windows was very gentle. When she had finished, she made the last small knot, and she snipped the thread with the small scissors, and she turned the glove over once and ran her thumb very softly across the new, careful line of dark stitching, and she laid the glove down in front of him, the right way out, the seam toward her own hand and the smooth side toward his. "There, Your Grace," she said very softly. He did not say thank you. He picked up the glove. He turned it over once in his own hands, slowly, as though it were a thing that had been brought back from a great distance. Then he put it on. He did up the small button at the wrist. He flexed the fingers gently. He laid the gloved hand flat on the polished walnut between them, palm down, very still. She watched him put it on. She did not speak either. She had not, in all her life, watched a man put on a glove she had mended. She had not known until that moment that a man could put on a glove the way Henry Lockwood put on that glove, like a man receiving back something he had thought he had lost. After a long, quiet moment, he reached, with the ungloved hand, across to the bookshelf at his right, and he took down a small, leather-bound family Bible, and he laid it on the desk between them, and he opened it gently to the back-end paper. The end paper was old and a little foxed. There were several names in it, in different hands, in different inks. The third entry from the top was written in fading sepia ink in a fine, careful 1782 hand. "Miss Pennington," he said quietly, "this is my mother's name, written in her own hand on the day she was married. She put my father's name beside it and the date, and she put a small line of violets in the margin because she liked violets. I have not shown this book to anyone in 3 years." He turned the Bible toward her gently so that she could see it. "There is a space beneath her line," he said. "I do not ask you for an answer today. I should not be so unkind. I only ask you when you are ready, and only when you are ready, Miss Pennington, whether you would consider writing your name there. I have been thinking, since the pump room, that I should rather like it to be written in the same fine, careful hand that mended my glove." Charlotte looked at the page. She looked at the small, fading line of 1,782 violets in the margin. She looked at the empty space beneath them. She did not say yes. She did not say no. She put her hand very gently on the corner of the open page, just for a moment, the way a person rests a hand on a thing that is too important to pick up. "Your Grace," she said softly, "I shall think of it very carefully." "I should be glad," he said, "of nothing else." "And Your Grace," she said after a small moment, "I should very much like to know what your mother liked to read. I did not know her. I should like to." He smiled then for the first time that afternoon, a small, still, careful smile that did not reach his shoulders or his hands, but that did, very gently, reach his eyes. "She liked Cowper," he said. And she liked, in particular, a small green volume of his shorter poems that she kept by the south window. "I shall lend it to you, if you will allow me." "I should be glad." He stood up. He went, in his quiet, careful way, to the south window, and he took down a small green volume from the lower shelf, and he set it gently in her hands. The cover was soft. The corners were a little worn. The spine had been mended once, very neatly, in matching dark thread. "My mother mended that too," he said. Charlotte ran her thumb along the small, careful line of stitching, and she did not say anything. She did not, perhaps, need to. "Your Grace," she said at last, "I should tell you something in fairness." "Yes, Miss Pennington." "I have very little to bring you. My father has settled what he can on me, and my mother had a small piece of land in Wiltshire that comes to me in a small parcel, and it is not altogether what is usually called a dowry. I should not wish you to be surprised later." "Miss Pennington," he said very gently, "I have not asked you about a dowry." "I know, Your Grace. That is why I am telling you." "I should be sorry to think," he said, "that you would write your name in this Bible because you felt a duty to. I should be sorry to think that you would ask me to write it because you felt a kindness to." He looked at her then. His kind gray-blue eyes were very steady. "I am asking you, Miss Pennington," he said, "because I should like to come downstairs in this house on a great many ordinary mornings and find you in the library at the south window with a needle in your hand. That is all. That is, in fact, the whole of it. I am asking for nothing more clever than that. Then your Grace shall have his ordinary mornings in time. I should like that very much. And your Grace shall not, while I am thinking, ask me again." "I shall not. Thank you." "You are very welcome, Miss Pennington." She did not write her name in the Bible that afternoon. She did not write it the next day. The party came to an end as quietly as it had begun, and the carriage took her and her aunt back to Bath, through a soft November mist. And the gloves she had mended 4 times rode home in her reticule on her lap, folded palms together, very neat. The small green volume of Cowper rode home in her traveling bag, wrapped carefully in a piece of cream silk her aunt had given her. She read 3 of the shorter poems on the way home, and she put the book back into the cream silk wrapping, and she sat very quietly looking out of the carriage window at the soft November fields, and her aunt, who knew her very well, did not ask her any questions. It was not until 8 days later, on a still evening in Milsom Street with a single candle on the small drawing-room table, and her aunt asleep in the next room, that she sat down with a fine pen and the small, leather-bound family Bible the Duke had sent over by his footman. And she wrote her name very carefully in the empty space beneath his mother's, in a hand that was not unlike his mother's, in fresh dark ink. She drew a small line of 3 violets in the margin beside her name, the way his mother had drawn violets beside hers, and she let the ink dry slowly. She closed the Bible. She put it back into the small wrapped parcel the footman had brought it in. She tied the parcel with a length of pale cream silk ribbon. She wrote one short note. She gave the parcel to her aunt's housemaid in the morning. She did not, in the entire small ceremony, weep once. She had decided, sitting at the desk in the candlelight, that she would not weep about a thing she had chosen for herself. The note said only this: "Your Grace, the desk catches the afternoon light particularly well. Yours, C. Pennington." She read it over once. She did not change a word. "That shall do," she said softly to the candle. "That shall do very well." The Duke received the parcel at Lindenmere on the Wednesday. He read the short note. He opened the Bible to the back-end paper. He looked at the fine, careful, new line beneath his mother's, and at the small line of 3 violets in the margin beside it. And he sat very still in the great chair by the library window for some time, with the small parcel ribbon still around his fingers, and his butler came in presently with a cup of tea and saw the look on the Duke's face and went out again without speaking. He wrote his answer the same evening. He sent his coachman with it the next morning. The answer was equally short. It said only this: Miss Pennington, then we shall both go on mending what comes to us. Yours, Wycombe. The carriage came down to Bath the following Monday for the small private call he meant to pay her aunt, and Mrs. Pennington received him in the small drawing-room in Milsom Street with a porcelain cup of tea and a piece of small white-iced fruit-cake she had baked herself, and the Duke, who had not eaten cake in any drawing-room in 3 years, ate 2 slices of it, and Mrs. Pennington was, very privately, charmed. The banns were read on the next 3 Sundays in the small Somerset Honeystone village chapel near Lindenmere. The chapel was covered by then in late autumn ivy and the last of the rose hips, and the wedding was set for the first Saturday in December, very quietly, with only the Duke's aunt, Mrs. Pennington, the vicar, and a few of the household. On the night before the wedding, in the small east bedroom at Lindenmere, where Mrs. Pennington had been installed for the occasion, Charlotte sat on the edge of the bed in the high-collared soft cream silk Regency morning gown and the mended cream silk gloves laid across her lap, and her aunt sat opposite her in the small upholstered chair by the south window. "My dear?" "Yes, Aunt." "You are quite well?" "I am quite well, Aunt." "You are not perhaps frightened?" "I am not, Aunt. I should rather have been frightened in October. I am not now." "Why not, my dear?" "Because he asked me about the desk, Aunt. Because he sat across from me at it, and not behind me. Because he watched me put the glove down, and did not say thank you. Because he showed me his mother's name in the Bible, and he did not press me for an answer. He has not, in any of it, hurried me." "No, my dear, he has not. And so I am not frightened." "Good, my dear." "Aunt." "Yes, my dear." "Will you sit at the front of the chapel?" "I shall." "Beside his aunt?" "I shall." "And you shall not weep, Aunt, if you can help it." "I shall try not to, my dear. I shall try. That is all I ask, Aunt." "Good night, my dear." "Good night, Aunt." On the morning of the wedding, the chapel smelled of cold stone and old flowers, and the small pot of rosemary the housekeeper had set on the altar. The light through the south windows was the very gentle gold of an early winter morning. Charlotte stood at the altar, in a soft, pale cream silk Regency wedding gown, made over the locked attire of her usual silk morning gown. Her long, wavy honey blonde hair, pinned up in the same soft, low chignon, with the same single sprig of small white violets, the small ivory cameo on its fine pearl ribbon at her throat. In her gloved hands, she carried a slim posy of late autumn rose hips that the housekeeper had cut from the south wall. The Duke stood beside her in the high-collared, fitted dark charcoal Regency tailcoat, the cream silk waistcoat with small horn buttons, the white silk cravat tied neatly, the ankle-length fawn breeches and white silk stockings, and the polished black knee-high riding boots, and his kind gray-blue eyes were very steady. When the vicar, in his white surplice and black cassock, asked for the ring, the Duke did not produce a new ring. He reached, instead, into the inside pocket of his tailcoat, and he took out a very small folded handkerchief of white linen, and he opened it on his palm, and inside it was a plain gold wedding band, slightly worn, with a single fine seam visible on the inner rim where it had once been carefully repaired. He laid the band gently in the vicar's hand. "This was my mother's," he said quietly. "She mended it herself in 1799, after my father drove a coach over it in the courtyard by accident, the day of my 8th birthday. She told me, when I was a boy, that it suited her better afterwards. I should like, with Miss Pennington's blessing, for it to be the ring." "Yes, Your Grace," Charlotte said softly. "I should like that very much." "You are sure, my dear?" "I am sure. It is a mended ring, my love." It is, my dear, the better for it. I should rather have a thing that has been mended by your mother's own hand than a new thing from any goldsmith in London. You are sure, my love? I am sure, Henry. I am very sure indeed. The vicar gave the band back to the Duke. The Duke took her gloved left hand very gently in his own, and he slid his late mother's mended gold wedding band onto her finger. It fit. It would have, perhaps, been a little loose without the silk glove, but with the glove it fit very neatly indeed. With this ring, he said softly, I thee wed. The vicar finished the service. The Duke's aunt wept very quietly into a small lace handkerchief in the front pew. Mrs. Pennington wept a little less quietly and was not in the least ashamed of it. The chapel bell rang once across the soft Somerset Valley, very gently, as the new Duchess of Wycombe walked back down the small, ivy-covered path with her husband's hand on hers, and the rose hips in her slim posy bobbed faintly in the cold, quiet air, and somewhere along the south wall, a small robin sang one short, careful note, as though it had been told that this was the moment. 6 weeks went by at Lindenmere very quietly. The new Duchess walked the beech avenue in the mornings with her husband. She took up her sewing again in the library most afternoons. She wrote in her own neat hand a great many small, kind notes to her father in the country, and to her sisters and to her aunt in Milsom Street. On the 3rd morning of her marriage, she came down to breakfast in the small east breakfast room and found her husband already at the table in the high-collared, fitted, dark charcoal Regency tailcoat, the cream silk waistcoat with small horn buttons, the white silk cravat tied neatly, and a small silver coffee pot at his right hand. And he stood up when she came in, the way he always would, and bowed. "Good morning, Your Grace," she said. "Good morning, my dear. You look very well this morning." "I have slept, my love. I had not, perhaps, slept properly for 3 years. I am told, by my valet, that I was quite improper about it." "Your valet is very impertinent, my dear." "He is. He has been with me since I was 19. I cannot send him away now." "You shall not, my dear. He has earned his place." She sat. He poured her a small cup of coffee and pushed it gently across to her, and he took up his own cup, and they were quiet a moment over the breakfast table. "My dear," he said at last, "I have a small confession to make to you." "A confession, Your Grace?" "You shall not call me Your Grace any more, Charlotte. You shall call me Henry when we are alone, and Wycombe when we are not. That is the first part of the confession." "And the second part, my dear?" "The second part," he said, and he set down his cup, "is that I have written to your father a small letter that I should like you to read before I send it." He produced, from the inside pocket of his tailcoat, a small, folded paper, and he set it gently on the white linen tablecloth between them. "What does it say, Henry?" "It says, my love, that I should like, with his permission, to settle a small piece of land in Somerset on each of your sisters, that they may have what is sometimes called a dowry, and that I should be very grateful if you would not refuse me, because I am still learning what it is to have sisters, and I should like to do this thing properly." Charlotte was very quiet a long moment. "Henry, you shall tell me, my love, if it is too much. You know your father better than I do. I shall write the letter again, if you wish." "It is not too much, my dear." "You are sure?" "I am sure." "Then I shall send it today." "Send it today, Henry." "Yes, my love." She did not cry at the breakfast table. She did, however, sit very still with the small, folded paper between her 2 cream silk gloved hands for a little while, and the small, silver coffee pot steamed gently, and the light through the east windows came down across them very softly, and the Duke did not say anything else for a little while either, because he had learned in 3 weeks of marriage that his Duchess did not weep about the things she had chosen for herself, and he had decided that he would not press her about it. In the second week, she went into the small Somerset village on a Wednesday morning on her husband's arm to call on the housekeeper's elderly mother who had been ill. The old woman lived in a small honeystone cottage at the end of a green lane, and the door stood open, and a small yellow cat sat on the step, and the housekeeper, Mrs. Whittle, opened the door to them herself and curtsied and said in a voice that wobbled a very small amount, "Your Grace, your Grace, my mother will be that pleased." "It is good of you to receive us, Mrs. Whittle," the Duchess said gently. "I have brought a small jar of my aunt's red currant jelly. I hope your mother will find it kind." "She will, your Grace, she will." The old woman was sitting up in a small armchair by a small fire. She wore a white lace cap. Her hands, on the arms of the chair, were very thin and very still. Charlotte sat down on a small footstool beside her and took one of the very thin hands gently in her own gloved one. "Mrs. Whittle, Sr., she said, "I am Charlotte. I have come to sit a little while with you, if you will let me." "Your Grace?" "Charlotte, today. I am only Charlotte today." The old woman looked at her for a long, quiet moment. Her old eyes were very bright. "Charlotte," she said, "it is a very pretty name." "Thank you. My daughter says the new Duchess mended the Duke's gloves." "I did, Mrs. Whittle, I did." "Then you shall be all right at Lindenmere, my dear." "I hope so, Mrs. Whittle." "You shall," the old woman said softly. "You shall." The Duke was standing very quietly by the small, low door. He did not come in. He did not speak. He only watched, in his quiet, careful way, while his Duchess sat on the footstool by the fire and held the old woman's hand. And after a long little while, he said softly, from the doorway, "Mrs. Whittle, may I send my carriage on Friday with a little broth from our kitchen?" "You are very kind, your Grace." "I am only being careful, Mrs. Whittle." The old woman gave a very small, almost laugh at that, and the housekeeper turned her face toward the small window, and Charlotte squeezed the very thin hand once, very gently, before she stood. On the way back along the green lane, the Duchess said very softly, "Henry." "Yes, my love. That is what you shall do, isn't it? That is what your 3 years have been training you for, sitting very quietly in doorways while careful women sit on footstools by small fires." "Perhaps, my love, I had not thought of it that way." "You shall, in time." "Yes, my dear. I love you very much, Henry." He did not answer in words. He covered her gloved hand on his arm with his own gloved hand, and he held it there the whole rest of the way back to the manor, and the pale stone south front of Lindenmere came into view at the end of the green lane in the gentle afternoon light, and the long beech avenue stood very still on either side of them, and the Duchess, who had said the thing very quietly that morning, did not feel the need to say it again. She mended, on 3 separate occasions, 3 more pairs of the Duke's gloves, and on the 4th occasion, when he handed her a 4th pair, she looked at him very quietly across the writing desk and said, "Your Grace, I begin to think you tear them on purpose." And the Duke, who had been a widower for 3 full years and had not laughed at his own foolishness in any of them, laughed. A small, surprised, quiet laugh that startled the butler, who had been bringing in the tea tray, and who would later tell the housekeeper, in confidence, that it was the first time he had heard such a laugh in the great house since the old Duchess had been alive. "Perhaps I do, my dear," the Duke said when he had recovered. "Perhaps I do." "Then your Grace had better send to the saddler in the village for a quantity of new gloves to be torn at his leisure," Charlotte said very gravely, "for I shall not have you tearing the good ones on purpose." As my Duchess wishes. Quite so. Charlotte. Yes, Henry. I shall send to the saddler tomorrow. You shall not, Henry. You shall send a kind note to my sisters in the country and ask each of them what they should like for their birthdays. That is a different errand, my love. It is not, my dear. It is the same one. You shall do both, and you shall not protest, and you shall sit very quietly by the south window while I write to my father about the small parcel of land in Wiltshire. Yes, my Duchess? Henry. Yes, my love. Thank you for the new gloves. You have been wearing the old ones in the library, Charlotte. I have. My dear, I had thought you might. You shall not be cross with me about it. I shall not, my love. They are yours. You shall wear what you like. Thank you, Henry. You are very welcome, my Duchess. The butler retreated to the corridor with the tea tray and stood there a moment, and then went on to the housekeeper's small parlor and shut the door, and he drank a small cup of tea himself before he went back. And the housekeeper, who had been in the family 40 years, asked him very gently, what was the matter? And he said, Mrs. Whittle. The Duke laughed. Did he? Mrs. Whittle said. She set down her cup. Well, that is a thing. It is, the butler agreed. And was her Grace laughing too? She was, Mrs. Whittle. Well, Mrs. Whittle said very quietly, and her eyes filled, and she did not say anything else for a while. In the second week of January, the new Duchess of Wykeham and her husband took the carriage back into Bath for a few days on a small piece of estate business. She had not asked to go to the pump room. She had not, in fact, thought about the pump room since the morning of the laughter, except sometimes, very briefly, in passing, the way one thinks about a small thing that has been settled. But on the second morning of their stay in Bath, the Duke laid down his coffee at breakfast and looked at her across the table and said very gently, My dear, I thought we might walk to the pump room this morning. The light is particularly fine today. She looked at him a moment. There was a small, careful-fitted parcel on the side table of their hired suite that had arrived from his glover the day before. A fitted, bath-cut, soft, pale cream silk pair of gloves to the elbow, made to her measure, that he had ordered for her as a betrothal gift in late November, and that had only just been finished. She had put them on that morning for the first time very quietly. She had put her old, mended cream silk gloves carefully into the small, fitted black wooden reticule on her wrist, folded palms together, the way her mother had taught her, the way she had folded them in the pump room on that Tuesday in October. The light, she said softly. Yes, my dear, I think we might. You will not mind my taking you back? I shall not mind, my dear. You are sure? I am sure. He looked at her across the breakfast table for a long, quiet moment, and then he nodded once, and he stood, and he came round the table, and he gave her his arm, and they went out into the cool, soft Bath morning. The Duke had her hand on his arm. She wore the fitted, bath-cut, soft, pale cream silk gloves to the elbow. The old mended gloves rode in her reticule. They walked along the colonnade together, slowly, not hurrying, and they came in under the arch of the pump room at a little after 11 o'clock, the way visitors come in when they have not come to be seen. The pump room was just as it had always been. The marble floor caught the light. The pump murmured softly into its cup. The same long arched windows let in the same cool light. There were a great many fashionable people. There were, in the center of the room, 3 young ladies in a small, careful group, and one of them was Lavinia Hartley. The other 2 were the same friends who had stood with her in October. They had not, perhaps, thought a great deal about the morning of the gloves since the morning of the gloves, or perhaps they had, very privately, and had not spoken of it. They were laughing softly together about something else now. The Duchess of Wykeham walked in on her husband's arm. It was the friend on the left who saw them first, and who stopped laughing very abruptly, and who put a hand on Lavinia Hartley's arm. Lavinia looked up. The friend on the right had not yet understood, but she would in a moment. Lavinia's pale blue eyes did not move from Charlotte's face for several long seconds. Charlotte did not slow her step. She did not show them the new gloves. She did not look at the small marble side table by the tall arched window, where, 4 months earlier, the old gloves had been laid in the soft, cool light. She walked steadily forward on the Duke's arm in the fitted bath-cut soft pale cream silk gloves, with the old mended cream silk gloves still folded carefully palms together in her reticule, and she did not turn her head. The Duke did not turn his head either. He did, however, slow his step very slightly as they came past the central group, only enough to allow Charlotte the choice, only enough to let her speak to her cousin if she chose to. Charlotte did not speak. She walked on past them, and her cream silk skirt with the tiny embroidered violets at the hem moved softly with her step, and the brass clasp of her reticule made one small, soft click against itself as her arm swung gently with her husband's, and the small ivory cameo at her throat caught the morning light for just a moment. If you have ever known what it is to mend the same pair of gloves 4 times, because they are the only ones you have, subscribe to Chapters by Candlelight. We tell these stories softly because some men know that careful stitching is the only mending that holds. At the far end of the pump room, they turned, and they walked a little way along the colonnade in the cool, quiet light, and they came back, and they did not go past the central group again. They went out the way they had come. Lavinia Hartley stood very still in the center of the room, with the friend's hand still on her arm. She did not laugh. She did not, for the rest of the season, laugh at anyone in her hearing about a mended glove. Her aunt would, in a small private moment over tea 4 days later, ask her quite gently what she thought she had been about that Tuesday in October. And Lavinia, who was not, when it came to it, a wholly unkind young woman, would answer very honestly that she did not any longer know. "Then I think, Lavinia," her aunt said softly, setting down her cup, "that you have learned a useful thing." "Yes, Aunt," Lavinia said, "and I think, my dear, that you might write your cousin a small, careful note." "Yes, Aunt," Lavinia said again after a quiet little while. "I think I might." She did write it, in the end. She wrote it that same afternoon, by a small fire in her own drawing room. Charlotte received the note 3 days later, sitting at the polished walnut writing desk in the South Library, and she read it twice. And she sat very still for a moment, and then she took up her pen and wrote back in her own neat hand. The Duke came in while she was sealing it. "My love. Henry. From your cousin. Yes, my dear. And you are answering?" "I am, my dear." "Kindly. Kindly, my dear. There is no other useful way. You are a better woman than I have any right to. I am not, Henry. I am only the woman who mended your glove. We agreed." "Yes, my Duchess, we did." "Henry?" "Yes, my love. You shall not, in your own life, hold this against her." "I shall not, my love." "You are sure?" "I am sure, Charlotte. If you have put it away, I shall put it away." "Thank you, Henry." "You are very welcome, my Duchess." Out in the cool bath light, on the morning of the visit to the pump room on the Duke's arm, the new Duchess of Wykeham walked back along the colonnade toward Milsom Street, where her aunt was waiting with the porcelain teapot and the small white-iced fruitcake she had baked herself. Charlotte put her gloved hand very gently on her husband's gloved hand, just for a moment. "My dear," she said softly, "the light was particularly fine." "It was, my love," the Duke said. I thought you should see it. Thank you for taking me back. I should have taken you sooner, my dear, if you had asked. I know, my dear. I was not ready. You are ready now? I am ready now. You did not look at her, Charlotte? No, my dear. You did not show her the new gloves? No, my dear. I did not particularly want to. Why not, my love? Because the new gloves are not what changed, Henry. The new gloves are only new gloves. The old gloves are what changed. He was very quiet a moment. That is a kinder answer than I should have given, my dear. It is the only true one, Henry. Yes. I do not, you see, mind her. Do you not, my love? I did on the morning of October. I did very much. I went home and mended the gloves another time, in a sort of small, dignified rage, by candlelight. I did not weep over them, but I should rather have liked to. I did not, in fact, say so to my aunt. I am sorry, my love. Do not be sorry, Henry. It was a useful morning in the end. In what way, my love? In every way that matters, my dear. He covered her gloved hand very gently with his own gloved hand, and they walked in quiet, careful step together along the colonnade, and the cool, soft bath morning light moved across them both, and the small, mended cream silk gloves rode in her reticule between them, very neat. Charlotte. Yes, Henry. I should like, when we get back to Milsom Street, to sit a little while in your aunt's drawing room before we go on. You shall, my dear. And I should like, if you will allow me, to bring her a small jar of honey from Lindenmere. I have one in my coat pocket. The bees did very well in October. You shall give it to her yourself, Henry. She will be very pleased. You are sure? I am sure. They came up to Milsom Street a little before noon, and Mrs. Pennington was at the front door of her small lodging in the high-collared, mauve Regency morning gown, neatly groomed silver-gray hair under the small white lace cap, kind hazel eyes a little anxious, and the Duke gave her his arm up the small step and into the drawing-room, and he produced from the inside pocket of his tailcoat the small jar of honey wrapped in a square of clean linen. Mrs. Pennington. Your Grace. From our hives at Lindenmere. I am told the bees did very well in October. You are very kind, Your Grace. I am only, as I have told your niece a great many times, being careful. It is the same thing in a man, Your Grace, in the end. He smiled, a small, still, careful smile, and bowed. Aunt, Charlotte said softly, we have been to the pump room. Mrs. Pennington set down the small jar of honey on the side table very carefully. Have you, my dear? We have. We walked past Lavinia and her two friends. I did not look at her. I did not show her the new gloves. I did not speak. And were you all right, my dear? I was very all right, Aunt. You are sure? I am sure. And Your Grace? Mrs. Pennington. Did Your Grace mind it? I did not, Mrs. Pennington. I should rather have minded had we not gone. I have been a widower 3 years. I have learned, perhaps, that a thing one has avoided is rarely the thing one ought to have avoided. That is well said, Your Grace. It is your niece who said it to me first, Mrs. Pennington. I have only repeated it back. Then it is doubly well said, Mrs. Pennington said softly, and she sat down with the porcelain teapot and a small white iced fruitcake she had baked that morning in expectation of them, and she poured them tea, and the Duke, as he had done before, ate 2 slices of the cake without being asked. Mrs. Pennington, Your Grace, you shall come to Lindenmere for Christmas. I shall send the carriage on the 18th. Your Grace, I shall not take a refusal, Mrs. Pennington. The library has the best afternoon light in the house, and your niece tells me you have not seen it. You shall stay until 12th night. Then I shall, Your Grace, with thanks. It is not a thanks, Mrs. Pennington. It is a debt. You raised your niece very carefully. I should like to repay it, if you will let me. My dear sister raised her, your grace, more than I. Then we shall name the small east bedroom for your sister, Mrs. Pennington, and put a vase of small white violets in it, and you shall sleep there. That is all. Mrs. Pennington, who had not, in 11 years of widowhood, been spoken to in quite that way by quite such a man, set down her porcelain teacup and folded her hands very gently in her lap, and said, in a voice that was not, perhaps, entirely steady, "Your grace is very kind." "I am only being careful, Mrs. Pennington." "Quite so, your grace. Quite so." That evening, at Mrs. Pennington's lodging in Milsom Street, with a single candle on the small drawing-room table and the soft hush of the late hour through the tall arched window, Charlotte sat down for one quiet moment alone before her husband came in to fetch her. And she took the old mended cream silk gloves out of her reticule and laid them flat on the table the way her mother had taught her, palms up, fingers together. She looked at the dark thread repair stitching across the second and third fingers of the right glove. She remembered, very softly, the small marble side table in the pump room. She did not feel sad about it. She did not feel triumphant about it either. She felt only very calm. Her aunt came in with the porcelain teapot and saw her sitting there and stopped in the doorway. "My dear?" "Aunt," Charlotte said quietly, "I am going to keep these in my drawer at Lindenmere. I do not think I shall mend them again. I do not perhaps need to, but I should like to keep them." "Yes, my dear," Mrs. Pennington said. "Yes, I should keep them. Aunt." "Yes, my dear." "Did you, in your own widowhood, keep anything?" "I kept your uncle's small ivory comb, my dear. I have it in my drawer at this lodging. I take it out, sometimes, on quiet evenings, and I put it back. That is all." "That is enough, Aunt." "Yes, my dear, it is." "Thank you, Aunt." "Thank you, my dear." "Aunt." "Yes, my dear." "You shall come for Christmas, won't you?" "I shall, my dear." "And you shall stay until 12th night." "I shall, my dear." "Good," Charlotte said softly. "I should not like the small east bedroom to be empty." "It shall not be, my dear." "Good night, Aunt." "Good night, my dear." The Duke came in a little while later, and he asked after his Aunt by Marriage's tea, and he ate another slice of the small white-iced fruitcake, for Mrs. Pennington had baked a fresh one in his honor. And he took his Duchess back to their hired suite through the cool, quiet Bath night, walking because she had wanted to walk. And the streets were quiet, and the gas lamps were soft, and the sky over the Abbey was a deep, gentle, dark blue, and somewhere far off a single bell rang the half-hour, and Charlotte put her cheek for one quiet moment against her husband's shoulder, and he did not speak, and she did not speak, and they walked the rest of the way home in a very kind quiet. The small green volume of Cowper sat on the bedside table at the hired suite. The Bible with her name written in the back-end paper sat at Lindenmere on the polished walnut writing desk. The mended gold wedding band sat very gently on her gloved finger. The old mended cream silk gloves sat folded palms together in her reticule, ready to be put away in her drawer at Lindenmere when they returned. And the old mended cream silk gloves rode home in her reticule, folded palms together, very neat, the way her mother had taught her, the way they had ridden home with her on a soft autumn afternoon in October, when she had not yet known whose hand she would put on her arm at the end of the year, and the small dark thread repair stitching across the second and third fingers of the right glove, done by candlelight in a small drawing room in Milsom Street 4 nights before a Tuesday morning that had not, after all, been unkind, was very neat indeed.